Hello everybody, welcome to another Examiner Tips video where I show you how to get A stars in your A-level economics essays. My name's Swithun Dobson and I have been an examiner for a number of years, and I wish to share my insights from examining with you to help improve your essays. So, what question are we going to do today? We're going to be doing this one. In 2015, a report by Public Health England recommended the imposition of a 20% tax on the sale of soft drinks that contain high levels of sugar. Evaluate the likely microeconomic effects of such a tax. This question was from the 2017 Edexcel paper. Even if you're not doing Edexcel, it doesn't matter. The general principles here will be applicable to what you're doing. This, though, is specific to Edexcel, but is helpful for those doing it, and for any of you. One of the issues that some people do have is timing when it comes to questions, so we really want to know how long we've got when we're writing the essays. So the Edexcel paper is 120 minutes. There's 100 marks in the entirety of the paper, which gives you 1.2 minutes a mark. The essays are 25 marks, which gives us then approximately 30 minutes for the essay. And that's kind of the amount of time you want to be spending. If you get extra time, whatever, modify it accordingly. So if you get 25% extra time, in this case, you'd be on 1.5 minutes a mark. So in this case, I'm going to suggest a 4-paragraph essay structure, which is a little bit different from what I've done before. But again, the principles are similar. We're not going to do the same structure for every essay. It just depends on what it is. So we've got intro, we got for, against, and conclude. A nice straightforward structure here. So what we're going to write in our introduction. In my introduction here, what I want to outline here is the problem. Now, the problem that the sugar tax seeks to solve is essentially this one. Soft drinks have lots of sugar in. Drinking lots of things with sugar in makes you fat, makes you obese, therefore it makes you more ill, you have more sick days, you work less, the output of the economy is worse, and so we could treat this as a negative externality in consumption. And this is the problem that the sugar tax aims to solve. I put this in the introduction because it's setting us up for the entire essay. Because the whole essay is basically, is the sugar tax a good way of solving this problem? And as I said, it's negative externality in consumption, so it's a demerit good, you could say, soft drinks, and so causes dead weight loss. So there we got our nice classic diagram there. We've got our dead weight loss area of E1, E2A, and what we're going to want to be doing with the tax is to get the consumption level from Q1 to Q2 to get rid of the dead weight loss. So now let's go on to our second paragraph, the arguments for the sugar tax. An indirect ad valorem tax, that's what the 20% one would be, it's a percentage tax, will shift the supply curve left, increase prices, reduce the quantity consumed, which is going to get us to the social optimum, and going to get rid of the dead weight loss. That's going to be the idea, so we want a diagram something like this. Remember, it's angled because it's a ad valorem, not a unit tax. And so what we'd want to do is to say in our essay that actually the social optimum level is Q0, and look, isn't this tax great? It gets us to where we want to be, gets rid of the dead weight loss, and makes everything better. And that's basically the argument for the sugar tax. Remember that when we're explaining the sugar tax, we want to explain exactly how it works, and why it's going to reduce the consumption. So in this case, it makes it more expensive. We shift supply left because it makes it effectively more expensive to supply, and some people don't drink it. Additionally, we can make the argument that people will switch over their substitutes to healthier drinks than like Coca-Cola. And additionally, we can say if people drink healthier drinks and they're less ill, there's be fewer costs to the NHS, so there's more spending to spend on other diseases, or we get a tax cut or something along those lines. So another thing you could drink maybe is good old Fiji water or something along those lines. And this is basically the argument for the sugar tax. So what's the argument against the sugar tax? Well, the first problem actually goes back to our introduction, which is to know how much to tax it, we need to know what the size of the negative externality is. So we need to know what the days of work lost are. Now, this is really hard to calculate because what we would ideally want to do is do an experiment where everyone in the country drank soft drinks for, let's say, a year, calculated the number of sick days they had, and then turn back time a year and then let them not drink it. Or, no, they would drink it and see how much difference there would be. But obviously you can't do that. So trying to calculate how much drinking sugar via fizzy drinks is causing a problem is very difficult to measure. Not only is it difficult to figure out how many days lost are attributable to the sugar, we need to also calculate the value of the days lost. And different workers provide different values, and so you'd have to figure out which type of person is more likely to be having days off because of high sugar content and being fat. So again, this is going to create somewhat of a large problem. These sorts of knowledge arguments we can use every single time against any form of government intervention. But crucially, don't just say, oh, the government has poor information, therefore they will get it wrong. I read that all the time. That's boring and doesn't give me much to work with. We want to say what they need to know and why they wouldn't know it. So this is the way we're going at it here. Let's suppose we get past that hurdle. We're then going to the sugar tax proper. To get the sugar tax to the correct level, we need to know the price elasticity of demand of the demand for fizzy drinks. Otherwise, we can under or overtax. So if you look at my first diagram here, the only thing we can observe before we impose the tax is the market price P and quantity Q, which is given by the original supply and demand curve. And let's suppose I estimate the demand curve to be D, the original one, and if I put ST in, I'll get myself to Q1, which is where I want to be, and that's the social optimum. However, I don't know that the demand curve is D. There's an infinite number of demand curves which can cut S at where price P would be. And so what is possible, we could have demand curve D1. Demand curve D1 would satisfy, is a possible demand curve that could have existed to explain the original equilibrium price P and Q. However, if it is there, and we put the tax to ST, the equilibrium price would be PT1, and more crucially, the quantity would only be Q2, which would imply then that we have actually undertaxed because we actually think the demand curve is more elastic than it actually is. And then conversely, with this one I've just added in D2, D2 is more elastic, and if it's more elastic, then the price is only going to go up to PT2, and the quantity is going to go down way far to Q3, which means we're actually consuming less than the socially optimal level, and therefore we have overtaxed in that case. So those are the problems that would have, and we can use those sort of technical arguments all the time. So they're quite versatile when it comes to sort of taxes and subsidies as well. Another argument we can make is, even if we were to get the social optimal level of consumption, as it were, the question is of one of composition. If you got all the light drinkers just to stop drinking and the heavy drinkers just kept drinking, so the social optimal level was at the correct level, in a sense you wouldn't be at the social optimum, because the problem when it comes to obesity more than likely is going to be those people who drink a lot of sugary drinks, not the people who have moderate and light drinkage. And who are the people most likely to stop drinking? Well, it's going to be the light and moderate drinkers. Obviously, whenever we put a tax, we can have a black marketing principle. That's possible. White van man, he wants to sell you Coca-Cola for 30p as opposed to, what was it now, like £1 for a can, if not more. So it might not even reduce consumption. And then, of course, there's the other problems of low quality products because they're avoiding tax and you can't take them to court. So you could get adulteration, etc., etc. So that's basically our kind of for and against sections. And so this time, what I'm going to show you is, when it comes to the conclusions, I'm going to show you two different types of conclusion. Based on the information I've got, I can do two different types of conclusion. One for the sugar tax and one against it. It doesn't matter which one you do. I just want to demonstrate that you can, with the same sort of information, take it any way you want. The crucial thing is, though, we make sure we explain everything we're doing. So here's my first conclusion. So I'm going to say here that the sugar tax is good. But what I'm going to say, it's good, but it's not perfect. So a lot of the arguments I was using were to the effect that we're not going to get it perfectly correct. But what all I need to claim is it will make the situation better. Of course, I don't have perfect knowledge, but what we kind of know is being overweight causes more illness and you're more ill. And, taxing is going to reduce the consumption, so it's going to make things, a little bit better. If I wanted to tax and actually make things worse, what I'd need to do is to tax so much that the quantity level was, let's say, over here. Because if you looked here, that triangle between here and here would actually be much greater than the dead weight loss if I didn't tax at all, which is E1, E2A. So to actually overtax, to actually make things worse, would have to be huge. So as long as I just taxed a little bit, I get it in between here. I suppose I don't aim for perfection. It's an improvement. And this is a standard way you can argue to say that government intervention is good when responding to the information objections. You say that it's not perfect, but it will just improve things. And that's a really easy way of doing it. And crucially, what you've done is you've responded to the arguments against. You're not just repeating arguments for or against. And this is crucially what we need to do in our conclusions. Also, we can say a 20% tax, it's not going to be high enough for a black market. I mean, you're not at cigarette and alcohol levels, so you're unlikely to get that much of a black market. Also, you could say, it's not just fat people who get ill because of sugar. High sugar intake in general is just kind of bad for lots of different reasons, even if you're not overweight. So, reducing sugar from light, moderate, and heavy drinkers is probably a good idea. Again, what we're doing is responding to the composition of consumption argument. We can additionally make the case, well, if we get extra revenue from the tax, which one I didn't mention before, is that we can then spend this on the NHS, or we could, a classic thing to do here in a conclusion is to go, we could subsidise healthy food and drinks that people could switch over to, and that will be a really great policy because it gives you the stick in the tax, but also give the carrot in the subsidy. So people could eat kale because it's nice and healthy, apparently. So that's why you could argue that the sugar tax is good, and here is why you could say it's bad. So the sugar tax is bad. Why? Because it's unlikely to reduce the intake of the overweight and will have little form of their weight loss. So this is sort of a little bit of repetition, but I'm going to say, I think that's unlikely, and we can develop that a little bit. We could say, well, people who are overweight probably have a greater preference for fizzy drinks, and so if they have the high price being higher, they're going to be more willing to consume it. We could also make an additional claim here that the problem is overall lifestyle. It's not that drinking fizzy drinks is necessarily bad and makes you ill. It's how much you drink of it in comparison with everything else that you do, and all the other food intake that you have. So just to focus on fizzy drinks is ridiculous, because you could be having loads of other intake of fat by having deep fried chips every night, for example. So that's not so this is a very narrow way of looking at it when it's a whole lifestyle exercise kind of issue. And related to this as well, back to the point about the moderate consumers, we could say that the tax reduces their welfare. They are being made worse off. And it's not really going to reduce the consumption of those overweight. So overall, it's going to be actually reduce welfare. Although not necessarily in the context of the externality diagram of such, but just in more of a case of, well, if you've got reduced consumption, like you would say show in a traditional monopoly diagram, you have dead weight loss because of that. You can make a similar argument when it comes to the moderate drinkers. We can repeat, that the government knowledge isn't good enough. We could say, they have some idea, but it's not going to be great. Something else we could say here as well is we could compare the government knowledge with the knowledge that the private sector has. So the private sector is always trying to estimate what the PEDs are to maximise their profits or to maximise their revenues, but they get it wrong a lot, because if they didn't, well, they wouldn't make losses and they'd be super profitable all the time, which of course they're not. But the thing is, the private sector likely is going to know the market better than the government is, because they're on the ground, they operate in it. The government just trying to get survey data isn't going to have that kind of quality of data. Also, if the private sector makes a mistake, they'll either have losses or lower levels of profits. The government makes a mistake, well, lessons will be learned and move on. They don't incur the same sort of cost that the private sector would. Consequently, we would expect them to be relatively worse than the private sector of intervening, or of estimating the PED. And the private sector gets it wrong all the time, so how much worse then will the government be with that? So yeah, the knowledge problem is, we can just explain why that's going to be a huge issue. In our conclusion, though, we don't necessarily need to say that all of our arguments against were necessarily good arguments. We could say black markets were unlikely, like we did in the other conclusion actually, because the level's not going to be very high, and it kind of depends on enforcement and the amount of penalties you're going to have. The probability of people engaging in black market activity is a function of how likely they are to be caught, plus what the penalties are going to be. And based on that, it determines whether it's going to be worth engaging in black market activity. So, yeah, with 20%, we think that's probably going to be unlikely. These are my top tips. What we need to do is we need to build chains of reasoning. We need to always ask why. We don't just want to say, oh, the sugar tax comes in, oh, we've now hit the social optimal level. Well, why is that the case? We need to explain all the process. So, what we want to do instead is to say, we impose the tax. This effectively increases the cost of production. Supply curve therefore shifts leftwards, which increases the price, which means that consumers are willing to buy fewer of the products because they're more expensive. So equilibrium quantity goes down, which then means we get to the social optimal level, and that's why it's good. But we want to explain all those bits in between. Don't just go straight to the conclusion. You need to build that analysis. Keep asking yourself when you're writing, why? And when you are fully confident that you've explained it, then that's where we want to be. We also want to use examples. I used the kale example. In this case, we've got a more concrete example with fizzy drinks, so examples are possibly slightly less important. However, if we wanted to make an argument, which I didn't mention, which we could have done, that the tax on fizzy drinks would be a tax on the poor, we could say that the demand curve is likely to be relatively inelastic because it has relatively few substitutes. The substitutes for fizzy drinks are probably alcohol and fruit juice, possibly water, but none of those are particularly good substitutes, which would give us reason to expect that the demand curve is relatively inelastic. So examples are good, and it shows your examiner if you're applying your relevant examples to the question and makes your answer more concrete. And then in the conclusion, what we want to do is to make reasoned judgments. I didn't just repeat in either of those. I didn't repeat what we've said in the arguments for and against, which I see a lot of the time. They just sort of regurgitate arguments for and against. I've said exactly why I think it's going to be good or why I think it's bad. So that's sort of responding to the arguments against, or extending the arguments against, or just overall weighing of the relative merits of the arguments presented. I'd like to thank you all now for watching. If any of you would like some more personalised tuition, please contact me at swithun@rougemont-tutoring.co.uk, and I'll be able to help you out there. And please comment on the video and subscribe. The more subscribers I get, the higher I get in the rankings, and more people can find this work and find it of use. Thank you.